Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. I am Boris Tizenghausen. August 14th. Today's top news at this moment. Ukraine has proposed that Russia mutually cease strikes on civilian targets in the Black Sea. The proposal was conveyed to Moscow through a third party, however, no one has received a response. I will remind you that Russia has been striking our ports since the very beginning of the war, but now Ukraine has created a mirror problem for Moscow. After the attack on the Novorossiysk port on August 12th, the Russians suspended the operations of 3 terminals at once in the port of Novorossiysk, through which Russia exports simply gigantic volumes of grain, including stolen grain. The strikes at that time affected not only the naval base and port infrastructure, but global wheat prices also reacted instantly. And here Turkey appears, Turkey as one of the main stakeholders, in ensuring that everything in the Black Sea is quiet and calm, and that trade continues in the usual manner. A few days before the Ukrainian proposal, on August 9th, Ankara itself proposed a moratorium on attacks in the Black Sea to both Russia and Ukraine. The reason, I think, is clear to everyone. The war had begun to spread to commercial shipping as well. Several ships under the Turkish flag have been attacked recently. That is, with a high degree of probability, the very third party through which Ukraine conveyed its proposal was, in fact, Turkey. Well, there is also a fourth party, the USA. J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, asked Ukraine to suspend strikes on tankers associated with the export of Kazakh oil. But Putin hasn't achieved a single strategic goal, which means he cannot agree to even a temporary truce. This means he does not want to end the war. Therefore, there is no response to either Ukraine or Turkey. One more point. Russia has, after all, already pulled off a similar trick. In March 2025, the US announced that Moscow and Kyiv had agreed to ensure the safety of shipping in the Black Sea. And after that, the Kremlin said, "Wait a second, hold on. Yes, we won't strike civilian vessels, but we still have this whole list of demands here." Back then, the Kremlin rolled out its additional demands, saying that the grain corridor agreement would not come into effect until the West met Russia's conditions. These included the return of one of the Russian banks to the international payment system and the easing of restrictions related to Russian agricultural exports. In other words, they later rolled out additional demands as an afterthought. Therefore, such a scenario is quite possible. Russia says, well, yes, we agree in principle, but then a list of conditions appears regarding sanctions, banks, ports, and anything else you can think of. There is perhaps one more strategic point. If such a limited moratorium does indeed start working and is observed for a few weeks, it could become the first functioning sectoral ceasefire. That is, a model that could later be extended to energy or even to mutual long-range strikes in general. But we understand who we are dealing with. Rotten to the core. Putin is a character who, until he gnaws off the Donbas with his own teeth, will not stop under any circumstances. Russians will starve, farmers will go bankrupt, huge Russian cities will stand completely without electricity and heat in winter. No! He needs the Donbas because Putin will always have light, heat, a crust of bread, and bread. Well, and here the Russian Federation responds in an absolutely predictable way. They released this nonsense from the Hippodrome. There will be no truce, Lavrov stated, and Russia's strikes will become much harsher. Well, you asked for it, you'll get it. So, Lavrov stated not only that there will be no truce, he said that Russia does not intend to stop hostilities at the current line of contact, and methods against facilities that fuel Ukraine's military support machine will be toughened. Well, he is hinting with such veiled threats at the Western countries that support Ukraine. There is one important point here. For Lavrov specifically, we are sending a message there to the Hippodrome. Russian strikes have remained exactly as they were for years now, but the strength, depth, and scale of Ukrainian strikes are growing. This statement, that there will be no ceasefire and that we do not intend to stop at the current line, should be reread by all Russians who are weeping and will weep because the war has come to their home. When Russian air defense hits a Russian high-rise building yet again, remember that it is because Putin needs a piece of land somewhere very far away in a foreign country, not to win back your piece of land, but in a foreign, distant country. Yes, Russians will be destroyed precisely because Putin doesn't have enough land. Russia is the largest country on the planet, 17 million square kilometers, yet Putin doesn't have enough land. And yes, Russians, reread this message when your husbands, children, fathers, and brothers die ingloriously for that very same reason. Putin does not want to stop the war because that bold ghoul needs a piece of the scorched Donbass. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It's important. You can do it right now without delay. We are fighting against Putin's propaganda, and together we will do it much more effectively. So, subscribe. The Russian Ministry of Defense, just so you understand, also published a picture of a Russian attack drone with the caption, "You'll get a freeze in winter." Well, they are hinting that there won't be any freezing of the front line right now. In winter there will be a freeze. That's how they decided to joke. By the way, they have already tried to freeze us more than once and leave us without fuel. Let me remind you, in 2022, they knocked out almost all of our oil refineries precisely to leave us without fuel. In the end, they were left without fuel themselves, and their own freeze is still ahead. So yes, you will get a freeze. You Russians will also be rewatching this picture in the winter. Winters in Russia are harsh. I don't think they are prepared for strikes on their own energy infrastructure. Huge Russian cities will be left without electricity and heat. They don't understand that yet. You can't even imagine what awaits you. And by the way, I remembered how they were recording videos. Gazprom spent a lot of money recording those videos about how Europe would freeze without Russian gas. Remember that? It was all set to music too. In the end, Gazprom went bankrupt and is suffering record losses. Well, how did that work out for you, all that video recording? Did Switzerland freeze there without your gas, huh, Russians? Oh right, the Russian Ministry of Defense even put an inscription next to this Shahed drone, like snow on the head. Meaning, these Russian drones in winter are like snow on the head. This, in their opinion, is supposed to be funny somehow. And I was immediately reminded of the billboards in Crimea with the inscription, "Now even stones from the sky." You remember that, right? So, how are things in Crimea? Don't want stones from the sky anymore? There's no electricity, no water, no tourists, no groceries, no fuel, no tourist season, but there are stones and a Botox-filled jellyfish in a bunker who wants to keep fighting. It will get even worse. You won't find any information anywhere in Russia right now about preparations for strikes on Russian energy infrastructure or how they plan to prepare for them. No, they don't even suspect that these strikes could happen. This information doesn't exist because there is no preparation. When they start taking out the energy infrastructure, there won't be any plan B, there will only be a big plan F. And while Putin dreams of Donbass, another one of his ports is being blown up. Following Novorossiysk, the strategic port of Ust-Luga was attacked today. This is the Leningrad region. Novatek and Eurochem terminals were attacked. According to preliminary information, the Novatek terminal territory was struck using both reactive weapons, and after that, drones were added to the mix. The governor announced that 54 drones were shot down. Then well, naturally everything was shot down, everything was fine, nothing was hit. Then, when the smoke and fire became visible to everyone, he admitted that debris had after all hit somewhere in the industrial zone and so on. And do you know where it hit? Novatek's gas condensate complex was damaged. It is precisely that, a very serious facility. This is where gas condensate is processed immediately before export. That is, according to preliminary data, 2 processing units were hit, and there are 3 of them in total, meaning 2 units with a capacity of 3 million tons each. Ust-Luga is, in essence, Russia's window to the Baltic, through which Moscow, after losing a significant portion of its traditional European routes, redirected huge flows of raw materials to maritime export, and even more so after new problems in the Black and Azov Seas. That is to say, the northern ports have acquired even greater significance, and even greater, which means there will be even more drones for you, like a bolt from the blue. By the way, Russian farmers there did not appreciate the jokes from the Russian Ministry of Defense. They started recording videos en masse, saying that it is now unprofitable for them to even sow. After the grain terminal in Novorossiysk was shut down, many found themselves simply on the verge of bankruptcy. They are just recording dozens of videos. Well, large grain elevators have stopped accepting shipments. Now it's a total collapse. What are they supposed to do now? They are wondering whether to sow or not to sow. What should they do? As is typical for Russians, no one is naming the reason, but everyone is sad, and Ukraine is performing an incredible feat. In every episode, we have an important fundraiser for the defense forces of Ukraine, and we are continuing to raise funds for EcoFlow charging stations for the favorite unmanned systems battalion of the 107th Brigade. They are currently carrying out combat missions in the Pokrovsk direction near Dobropilya, one of the hottest sectors. The soldiers have recorded a video message for you. Please take a look.
Ми, військовослужбовці 2-го батальйону безпілотних систем «Фаворит», виконуємо бойові завдання по знищенню ворога на Покровському напрямку та в районі Добропілля. Звертаємось до Бориса Тисенгаузена та спільноти каналу Бориса з проханням допомогти закрити збір на придбання зарядних станцій для АКБ ударних дронів. Слава Україні! Героям слава!
Let's help our warriors, especially since we have very little left to close this fundraiser. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. There is Mono, Privat, and PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. The QR code is in the corner for those watching me on other channels. Thank you all so much for helping our warriors and supporting Ukraine during this very difficult time for us. You are simply incredible. Thank you. Meanwhile, guess what Putin is busy with? Putin has convened an operational meeting attention on preserving traditional values in the creative industries. This is not a joke. And attending this important operational meeting on preserving traditional values were Defense Minister Belousov, Narishkin, the head of the Foreign Intelligence Service, the semi-liquid ethyl terminator Medvedev, who fell asleep there almost immediately, Volodin, who practices values that are not very traditional in the Russian sense, Shoigu, and Kirienko. An operational meeting, traditional values in creative industries. A hangout of Chekist geezers and the court drunkard discussing what ideas and values films, TV series, music, internet content, and computer games should broadcast. The most interesting thing is that it doesn't matter what they discuss there. In the end, they'll still use state money to make some absolutely low-quality trash like Kolobok and say, well, we are fighting the good fight, as they say. In short, 70-year-old Chekists led by Putin, who doesn't even use the internet, are deciding what kind of values should be in computer games for children. And I came across another piece of news. A Russian streamer was deported from Kazakhstan and banned from entering for 5 years. Well, I picked this news story because it concerns not just Kazakhstan, but everyone who happens to be a neighbor of the Russian Federation. This streamer made provocative statements about Kazakhstan, disputed the ownership of cities, and spoke negatively about Kazakhs and local traditions. I watched the clips of what she was kicked out of Kazakhstan for. She's a classic imperial specimen. Most of them behave like that abroad, for phrases roughly like this. Oh, I thought you guys in Kazakhstan all rode horses and lived in yurts instead of houses. Well, you recognize that, don't you? In Russia, by the way, they still make jokes like that in all those moronic KVN shows of theirs. They have the titular nation and everyone else, well, they make jokes about everyone else like that. Or, where did you get civilization from here? Are you copying everything from the West? Where does civilization even come from in Kazakhstan? The denial of the culture and identity of other states has simply become entrenched at the state level in Russia. Remember how various Russian officials declared that Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Armenia, Georgia, all these are made-up countries gifted by Lenin, Stalin, or someone else. And when did you decide in Russia that you are great? By what criteria did you suddenly determine that you specifically are great? If the main argument is, the size of the territory, then history shows that this is a changeable and fixable thing. The Mongol Empire occupied a colossal space. There was the Roman Empire, the Ottoman, the Austro-Hungarian, the Russian Empire, and finally, the Soviet Union. At a certain point, they all seemed huge, powerful, and almost eternal. Then they collapsed, disappeared, or turned, into completely different states. But, the Russian habit of projecting this greatness onto everything is particularly interesting. There's Great Russia, the Great Russian people, the Great Russian language, Great Russian literature. Why is Russian literature great, but French and English, for example, are not? Or Spanish? Why? The fact that you have read Dostoevsky does not at all mean that before Dostoevsky or at the same time as him, humanity was sitting in some kind of cultural darkness, and there was absolutely no one else besides Dostoevsky. Several centuries ago, I remind you, before him there was Geoffrey Chaucer in England, Dante in Italy, Cervantes in Spain, then there were Goethe and Schiller in Germany. So why did you decide that Mickiewicz was in Poland and Shevchenko was in Ukraine? I'm only listing Europe. You read Griboyedov beautifully. Well done. In that same era, Europe was reading Goethe, Walter Scott, Jane Austen, and most importantly, the presence, in the Russian view, of the great Dostoevsky. Well, it certainly doesn't make that loser Medvedev great, who is threatening a neighboring country today. Why are you bringing up all this greatness from back then? Well, someone wrote good works, for example. So why on earth did you all suddenly become great? Moreover, if you start looking into who actually created all these great symbols of yours, it turns out they aren't Russian at all. That is the sad truth. Who created the Moscow Kremlin? Italian architects. The Spasskaya Tower of the Kremlin was also built by Italians. The Dormition Cathedral, Fioravanti, an Italian, the Winter Palace, Rastrelli, the Grand Peterhof Palace, and the Catherine Palace in Saskoye Selo, also Rastrelli. St. Isaac's Cathedral, the Frenchman Montferrand, the Alexander Column, also the Frenchman Montferrand, the Peter and Paul Cathedral, also the Italian Trezzini. That is, when you start breaking down the material symbols of Russian imperial greatness, it turns out that the Kremlin was built by Italians, and the Tsarist palaces were also built by Italians. The main imperial cathedral and the Victory Column were built by a Frenchman, and one of the main symbols of St. Petersburg and the burial vault of the Romanovs was built by an Italian. And there is nothing wrong with that. Truly there isn't. What's bad is something else. First, you spend centuries using the achievements of world culture, and then you tell the whole world about some special civilization of your own, while simultaneously calling into question the culture and identity of other peoples who, by the way, appeared much earlier than yours. Aggressive ignorance. And if you dig even deeper, it turns out that the Tsars who ruled the Russian Federation weren't even Russian. Catherine the Great was German. Everyone knows that. Peter III was a German duke, actually. By the way, starting with him, all Russian emperors in the male line belong to a German house. That's how it happens. Where is it? Where is all this greatness? What makes you think you are unique and one of a kind and that God is with you? That is the question. And just wonderful news, as if it had migrated to the present day from the deep Soviet era. Advisor to the President of the Russian Federation, Elena Yampolskaya, has called for dealing with the shadow distribution of Hollywood films in Russian cinemas. It is impossible to clearly track what exactly is being shown, Spider-Man or something much more dangerous, she stated. Underground distribution of Hollywood films, Western contraband, Spider-Man or something more dangerous than Spider-Man. But this is just a classic. Today he plays jazz and tomorrow he'll sell out his homeland. The meeting of the Council on Traditional Values for Computer Games fits right in here too. That is, Putin is trying to revive this ugly Soviet monster, but even that won't work for him. He is a loser dictator, a Botox-filled underground slug with the ambitions of Alexander the Great or Peter the Great. He was a faceless, cowardly moth, pardon my French, and he has remained one. I mean, you have to be so scared that you're even afraid of your own pocket opposition. Can you imagine just how cowardly it is? And you, my friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones. Subscribe to this channel, don't forget, and let's help our warriors. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. Have a peaceful day, everyone, and glory to Ukraine.